Imagine being a young black teen at the airport, just minding your business, when suddenly airport staff calls the cops on you for no reason. They think you're trouble, but they couldn't be more wrong. What happens next will shock you. When his mom arrives, the whole situation takes an unexpected turn. The truth, it changes everything. Stick around to find out how a simple mistake becomes a big wake-up call for the airport staff and the officers involved. Before we continue, comment where you're watching from and subscribe for more powerful stories. Meet Jamal, a 16-year-old black teen traveling alone for the first time. He's excited to visit his aunt, but he has no idea that a normal airport day will turn into a nightmare. Jamal walks through the crowded terminal, minding his own business, checking his flight details, and eagerly waiting for the next step in his journey. He doesn't know it yet, but he's about to become the target of suspicion for something he didn't do. The airport staff, stationed around the gates, notice him. They don't see a teenager excited for a trip. They see something else, something based on prejudice. They see a young black man, and in their eyes, that alone makes him suspicious. When Jamal pauses to check his bag, they watch him closely, whispering to each other. They think he's acting strangely, but Jamal knows he's done nothing wrong. Despite this, they decide to call security, thinking he's up to something. As Jamal is quietly detained, he begins to feel a rising sense of confusion and panic. Why was he singled out? What did he do to deserve this? At this moment, Jamal isn't just a teen at the airport. He's the target of racial profiling, and the reality of it is sinking in. Jamal was walking through the crowded terminal when it happened. Everything was fine. He was just excited for his first solo trip. But suddenly, the tension in the air shifted. He was stopped by an airport staff member who glanced at him suspiciously. "Can I help you?" the staff member asked, though Jamal hadn't done anything to warrant such attention. He shrugged, trying to remain calm. "I'm just waiting for my flight," he said. But before he knew it, another staff member appeared, then another. Jamal's confusion deepened as they began whispering among themselves. And before he could ask what was going on, they had already called security. The situation was escalating fast, and Jamal had no idea why. As the officers arrived, Jamal's heart raced. He tried to explain, but his voice trembled. "I haven't done anything wrong." The officers didn't respond, their eyes scanning him as if they already decided he was guilty. "What's this about?" Jamal asked again, his voice shaky with disbelief. "He's acting suspicious," one officer muttered, barely acknowledging him. Jamal's mind raced. Suspicious? For what? He hadn't said anything out of line, hadn't moved out of the ordinary. Yet here he was, detained without reason. The staff members hovered nearby, casting glances at each other, clearly unsure of what was happening. They exchanged whispers, and Jamal felt the weight of their judgment. It hit him like a wave. This wasn't about his actions. This was about who he was. The officers turned their backs for a moment, as if deciding what to do with him. Jamal stood frozen, feeling both helpless and terrified. He was being treated like a criminal, and all because of his skin. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. He was supposed to be on his way to visit his aunt, not stuck in an airport fighting for his rights. Then, just as things were getting unbearable, a familiar voice broke through the tension. "What is going on here?" Jamal's heart leaped as he turned to see his mother, Angela, rushing toward him. She had no idea what was happening, but when she saw the crowd of officers surrounding him, her protective instincts kicked in. "Why are you detaining my son?" she demanded, her voice cutting through the chaos. The officers hesitated. They hadn't expected her arrival. Angela's presence shifted the entire dynamic. Jamal could feel a sense of relief wash over him, but the confusion hadn't gone away. He was still confused about why this was happening at all. One of the officers, clearly trying to cover his tracks, stammered, "He was acting suspicious. We had to question him." Angela raised an eyebrow. "Suspicious? My son is a teenager traveling alone. He hasn't done anything wrong." She turned to the staff members who were standing awkwardly to the side. "You made a mistake," she said flatly. "You saw a young black man and assumed he was trouble." The staff members exchanged uneasy glances, and one of them nervously stepped forward. "We thought he was loitering," the staff member said almost apologetically. "We didn't realize." Angela didn't let him finish. "You didn't realize. You didn't even give him a chance to explain." At that moment, the officers, who had been standing stoically, began to shift uncomfortably. They started to realize they had made a huge mistake, but it was too late to take back their actions. The damage had already been done. They had racially profiled Jamal based solely on his appearance, and now they had to face the consequences. Angela, calm but firm, demanded, "You need to apologize to my son right now." The officers mumbled apologies, clearly embarrassed. But Jamal wasn't sure if the apology meant anything at all. They hadn't just embarrassed him. They had wrongfully detained him, assumed his guilt, and treated him as though he was lesser. As they walked away, Angela put her arm around Jamal, offering comfort. But even as they stood there, she knew this wouldn't be the last time they would face something like this. The world wasn't ready to stop judging people like her son. And though this incident might end with an apology, Jamal knew that it was just one of many battles they would fight together. Jamal's heart pounded. He couldn't understand what was happening. A few minutes ago, he was just waiting for his flight, but now he was surrounded by officers who seemed determined to treat him like a criminal. "Why am I being detained?" he asked again, but the officers ignored him, their eyes cold and unyielding. His confusion grew as the tension thickened. He hadn't done anything wrong. But the more they looked at him, the more he realized it wasn't about what he had done. It was about who he was. He was a young black man in a public space, and that seemed to be enough to make him a suspect in their eyes. As Jamal stood there, trying to stay calm, he felt trapped. He was being judged for something beyond his control, and no matter what he said, no one was listening. The voices around him faded as the officers continued to question him, their words harsh and accusatory. Jamal felt helpless. Then, just as the situation seemed like it might spiral completely out of control, a voice broke through. "What's going on here?" Jamal turned to see his mother, Angela, walking toward him with purpose. Her eyes scanned the scene quickly, and it didn't take long for her to see the officers surrounding her son. Her first instinct was to protect him, but she remained calm, her voice sharp and commanding. "What's happening? Why is my son being detained?" she demanded, stepping between Jamal and the officers. The officers hesitated, taken aback by the sudden presence of an authority figure. One officer tried to explain, but his words were weak. "Your son was acting suspicious," he said, still not meeting Angela's gaze. Angela didn't flinch. "Suspicious?" she asked. "What exactly does that mean?" The officer was caught off guard. He fumbled for an answer. "He was loitering, near the gate." "Loitering," Angela echoed, her voice rising with disbelief. "My son is waiting for his flight. What exactly did he do wrong?" The officer's face grew red as the other staff members who had initially called the cops stood off to the side, avoiding eye contact. Angela wasn't backing down. "I want a real explanation. You can't just grab a young black man and treat him like a criminal. This is unacceptable." The staff members began to murmur to each other. One of them nervously spoke up. "We thought he was standing around too long without any reason. We didn't know he was waiting for someone." Angela shook her head, her voice cutting through the air. "You assumed he was doing something wrong just because of the way he looks. This isn't a mistake. This is racial profiling." Jamal stood silently beside his mother, a mixture of relief and anger bubbling inside him. He hadn't expected her to show up, but he was grateful she had. Her presence was a game changer. As the officer turned his gaze toward the ground, Jamal could sense the tension shifting. The truth was becoming undeniable. The staff had made a huge mistake, and it was finally starting to sink in. Angela didn't let up. "You need to apologize to my son," she said firmly. "Now." The officer, his face now redder than ever, muttered a quick apology. "We're sorry, ma'am. There's been a misunderstanding." But Angela wasn't satisfied. "You're not just apologizing. You're admitting that you treated him unfairly. You racially profiled my son, and no apology can take that back." Jamal felt a knot in his stomach loosen. The officers might have apologized, but the damage had been done. He wasn't sure if he could ever forget the way he'd been treated, how his presence had been enough to make him a suspect. As the officers and airport staff slinked away, their heads lowered in shame, Jamal and his mother exchanged a quiet glance. They weren't just walking away from an apology. They were walking away from a mistake that was much bigger than this moment. Angela wrapped her arm around Jamal's shoulders, offering a sense of calm in the storm. But both of them knew this wasn't over. The truth had been revealed, but it was just one example of a much larger issue, an issue they would have to keep fighting. Jamal stood frozen, his mind still spinning. The officers had apologized, but their words felt hollow. Angela, his mom, was right. This wasn't just about him. It wasn't about one wrongfully detained teen. This was part of a bigger, deeper issue, something Jamal was only beginning to truly understand. Angela's words echoed in his mind as they walked toward the airport exit. She'd made it clear. This wasn't a mistake. It was racial profiling, something black people faced every day. Jamal wasn't a criminal. He hadn't done anything wrong, yet his skin was enough to make people suspect him. His anger simmered beneath the surface, and the frustration built up as the weight of it all started to hit him. Why did it take his mom showing up to make them realize their mistake? Just when Jamal thought the ordeal was over, a voice stopped them in their tracks. One of the airport staff members, the one who had called the cops in the first place, stepped forward. Their face was filled with guilt. "Ma'am, I need to speak to you," they said, nervously glancing around. Angela stopped, her posture firm. "What is it?" The staff member hesitated, but then spoke, their voice quieter. "We made a mistake. But it's more than just this one time. It's a pattern. I've seen it happen before. People like you, people like your son, we make assumptions based on what we see, not who they really are. And that's not right." Jamal's stomach dropped as the truth settled in. This wasn't just about one person making a mistake. This was about something bigger, something institutional. The staff member wasn't just apologizing for what happened. It was a recognition of something they had ignored for too long. Jamal's eyes widened as he realized they were acknowledging the problem. His mother was right. Words could be empty, but this was an eye-opening moment. Angela's voice was calm, but there was a fire behind it. You can apologize, but that doesn't change anything. You need to understand that this isn't just about a mistake. You need to make sure this never happens again." The staff member nodded, looking genuinely remorseful. "I'm going to make sure this is addressed. It won't just be brushed aside." But Jamal couldn't help but wonder if that would be enough. Apologies were easy. Changing systems? That took work. He looked at his mom, who seemed hopeful, but her expression was still serious. The officer, who had been silent until now, shifted uncomfortably. "We're truly sorry for the misunderstanding, ma'am. We had no intention of—" Angela didn't let him finish. "No intention? Then why didn't you question your assumptions? Why didn't you think twice about detaining him? You're supposed to serve and protect, not judge people based on the color of their skin." The officer lowered his gaze, the words now heavy in the air. He couldn't deny it. They had made a mistake, a big one. But it wasn't just the officers or the staff. It was the whole system that operated under assumptions, under stereotypes. Jamal had become a victim of it, and it wasn't just going to go away with a simple apology. Angela turned back to Jamal. "This is a battle, son. We've got to fight for change. But it starts with speaking up, calling out the lies, and refusing to stay silent." Jamal nodded, his anger slowly transforming into resolve. He understood now. This wasn't just about him. This was about something bigger, something he couldn't ignore. His mother was showing him that standing up for yourself was the first step in making a difference. As they walked out of the airport, Jamal couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. Maybe it was the apology. Maybe it was the staff member's honesty. Or maybe it was the realization that this fight wasn't over. It had only just begun. He was no longer just a teen. He was someone who had been wronged, and now he had to make sure it didn't happen to anyone else. The tension at the airport had finally died down, but the weight of the situation stayed with Jamal as he walked beside his mother. He had been wrongfully detained. His skin had made him a target, and no matter how much he tried to explain, the assumptions had already been made. The officers apologized. The staff acknowledged their mistake, but the truth was clear. Jamal had been profiled because of his race. Angela, his mother, could sense the anger and frustration still brewing inside him. "I know you're upset, son," she said, her voice soft yet steady. "But you can't let this define who you are." Jamal turned to look at her. He could feel her calmness, the way she had handled the situation with such grace. But that wasn't how he felt. He was angry, not just at the officers, but at the system that allowed this to happen. "How do I just move on?" he asked, his voice tight. "How do I forget this?" Angela stopped walking for a moment, turning to face him. "You don't forget it, Jamal. You don't ignore it. But you also don't let it crush you. What happened here today? It's part of something bigger. You've seen it. We've all seen it. But now it's time to use your voice." Jamal wasn't sure how to respond. Could he really make a difference? Could his voice matter in a world that had judged him before he even opened his mouth? "Mom, they just saw me as a threat," he muttered, the words bitter in his mouth. "They didn't even care to ask. Just because of how I look." Angela looked him in the eyes. "That's right. And that's the truth we need to keep fighting for. The truth is, your life matters. And until people see you for who you truly are, instead of what they want to assume about you, this fight won't be over." The truth hit Jamal like a ton of bricks. His mom was right. He couldn't just walk away from this moment. He couldn't forget it, no matter how hard he tried. The anger he felt wasn't something to bury. It was something to fuel the change that had to come. They had made a mistake at the airport, yes. But how many times had mistakes like this gone unnoticed? How many times had black men and women been profiled and punished for things they didn't do? And how many times had those people never been given the opportunity to stand up, to speak out? Jamal had that opportunity, and for the first time, he felt the weight of it, the responsibility to speak up, to make sure this wasn't just an isolated incident, but part of a larger conversation. "I'm not going to let this go," Jamal said, the resolve in his voice growing stronger with each word. "I don't know how yet, but I won't stay silent about it." Angela smiled gently, a proud look in her eyes. "That's my boy. We won't stop until things change. We'll keep fighting. For you, for me, for everyone who's ever felt this pain." As they made their way to the parking lot, Jamal's mind was racing. His mom's words had ignited something in him. He didn't have to face this alone. He had the power of his voice, and that was a start. But more than that, he had the support of his mother, who had always fought for what was right. He wasn't just a victim anymore. He was a part of the fight. And as he thought about the officers and the staff who had apologized, Jamal realized something important. Apologies were a start, but they weren't enough. What mattered now was the action behind those words. What mattered was whether people would really change, whether they would really understand the impact of their actions. As they reached the car, Jamal took a deep breath. This wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning. The world had to change, and he was ready to help make that happen. As they drove away from the airport, Jamal's mind was still buzzing. He couldn't shake the images of what had just happened, the way the officers had surrounded him, the way the staff had assumed the worst about him. But now, as he sat next to his mother, something had shifted. His mother's words still echoed in his mind. She had shown him how to turn anger into action, how to take the hurt and use it to spark change. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about every single person who had ever been judged based on the color of their skin. "You don't have to face this alone," Angela had said, and that was something Jamal would carry with him forever. Because the truth was, this fight was bigger than just one person. It was about all of us. The more people spoke up, the more the truth was exposed. That's when things could start to change. But change wouldn't come unless everyone played a part. Jamal realized that now. If he could stand up and speak out, if he could share his story, maybe others would too. Together, they could push back against a system that had long treated people like him as less than. Jamal turned to his mother and smiled. "We're not stopping, right?" Angela grinned. "Number, this is just the beginning." And she was right. It was just the beginning. Jamal was ready to keep going, to fight for something better, for himself, for others, and for a future where no one ever had to face what he did today.